Hey guys, and welcome back to part 3 of this character design series, Going Commando. Sorry it took so long to get this thing done. It's been, like a month now? Had some other projects come up that really derailed me on this thing, and I've been working on it off and on whenever I had a chance, and this past weekend I had the chance to really sit down with it and get it finished up. Word of warning, it took all told about 5 or 6 hours to complete the rendering process on this character. So condensing that to 8 or 10 minutes means that it is going to be really fast. I'm going to be blazing through the coloring process here. So that means that there will be a lot of little things that I'm going to miss. I'll try to mention the more interesting things that I'm doing as they come up, but there will definitely be things that I just won't cover, and I apologize about that. But in the interest of time, there's really no way to get around that. So just wanted to tell you that up front, and let's go ahead and get started. And first off, I start with the face. I think I mentioned in the last video that faces are my favorite thing to do, and whenever I do something like this, I'm just always dying to get back to the face. When I was laying down the basic colors for everything else, it was just killing me that I wasn't able to go in and render this face. But now that I have everything done, I can come in and spend a lot of time. But I still have to watch myself. I don't want to spend too much time on the face at any given time, because if I do that, then I'll stay on it forever. I'll never get the rest of it done. I'll have the face to a much higher degree of detail than everything else. I still end up doing that most of the time, but I'm working on it. What I'm doing right now is basically just a first pass. I'm going over all of the line work and adding a little more value, a little bit darker values, a little bit lighter values. I don't want to, again, spend too much time on any one thing at a time. I'd want to just get rid of the line work. That's the most important thing right now, because those lines are really dark, and if you leave that stuff in, it can really throw off the composition. So I'm making an effort right now just to make a first pass and to get rid of all that stuff. Once I'm done doing that, then I'll come back in and start putting a little bit darker values, a little bit lighter values, and I'll continue to do that process over and over again until I have it completed. It usually takes about 3 passes to really finish everything up. Brushes, I normally use just the round brush for everything. Every once in a while, if I'm just doing something from start to finish in color, I'll use a chalk brush just to give it a little texture and a little character. But when I'm doing something from line work like this, I usually just use the round brush and the round hard brush. And I'll keep the opacity anywhere between 90 to 100%. There'll be some times when I kick it down to 85 when I want to meter some of the lighter or darker values, but for the most part I keep it around 90%. When I first started painting, I used to use a much lower opacity, and I had a tendency, because of that, for my stuff to look really muddy. The colors would really blend in together, and it just doesn't look good. If you can force yourself to use a really high opacity with your color, then your stuff will end up looking better. It's tough to begin with because you have to constantly change the color manually to get your change in value, but you'll end up with much stronger pieces if you're able to do that. It took me probably 3 or 4 months of doing that really before I got really comfortable with it, but once I did, it just made such a huge difference in the way my stuff looked. And that's not to say that you won't use the lower opacities on anything. You still will probably have to use it on round objects or larger objects that are kind of rounded that you'll have to show some sort of gradient on. You just decrease the usage of it. You probably should only be using it 20 or 30% of the time. Most of the time you should be using a really high opacity. And it'll just make your stuff look a lot cleaner. It'll look a lot more painterly, and it'll really get rid of that muddy feel. So here I'm just continuing to render things out. On these weapons, I don't think I do it yet, but I use the selection tool quite a bit to help keep straight edges. The selection tool allows you to select just a specific area, and you can only draw inside that area. And I like to use that on weapons and things that are mechanical like that, because it gives you a really nice, clean, straight edge, and just really helps define those shapes and make them look really sharp. That left eye was looking a little wonky, so I jumped into the liquify tool and straightened it out. Wonky's an interesting word there, Chef. Nobody wants a wonky eye. It's right up there with shifty eyes and beady eyes. Beady eyes are actually probably a little bit worse, though. That's subjective, of course. You'll see on these cylinders I'm using a really simple and kind of typical lighting scheme for them when you're doing a top-down lighting. It's difficult when you have a character like this that's just standing in a white background to render cylinders, or it was for me initially anyway. Typically when you're rendering something that's a cylinder, especially something that's metal, you reflect the colors that are in the background. So if, like, he was standing outside in a forest, I would be putting blues and whites towards the top and greens and darker browns and things like that towards the bottom to just sort of mirror what's in the environment around them. And that's how you render things that are metal, and especially things that are cylindrical. You would sort of compress them at the center and spread them out as they go towards the top and bottom. But since he's in a white background, there's nothing really to reflect. So it makes it a little difficult for to choose your colors and things like that. So I just go with a basic grays and whites there, which can make them a little bit boring, but there's nothing really to work off of when you have a background like that. And that's okay, as long as you're communicating the form, then it doesn't really matter. I am, however, keeping all those grays tending towards the green family. You can't see it because it's going by so quickly here, but when I'm selecting the colors, they're slightly tinted green. I'm keeping them really far towards the desaturated area because I don't want it to be really bright, but I do want it to tie in with the green of the character so that it all comes together with the composition. Here I'm using the ellipse tool to make those curves. I put a little selection off to the side and trace around the outside of it and copy paste it on a different layer so that I can just continuously copy and move it around to help keep that edge really sharp and to make the ellipse a little prettier. I'm kind of running out of stuff to talk about here. I've got some interesting theories concerning unifying quantum mechanics and general relativity through the specific nature of mass and gravity. If anybody would like to talk about that. Anybody? No? Just me and the crickets? Alright. I use the ellipse selection on the other side too. I get to the point here where I feel like I don't really need it on these little rings as much. So it's kind of hand draw those out. And here I'm starting to make that second pass, going over everything once again and adding a few highlights, a few darker areas. And they're really sort of getting towards the end here. That little ammo pouch on the side there I never really liked. I didn't like the little handle on top and way it connected to the belt, so I decided to just take it out, create a little dark space behind it like it's connecting in the back somewhere, because it just didn't look good. So I switched it up some, segmented it there, try to give it a little more visual interest. I was never really happy with these fingers. They still were just a little too slender, not quite meaty enough, and I kept planning once I got it closer to being fully rendered to use a transform tool to make them a little bigger, but I just never really got to it. I was getting to a point where I really needed to finish this thing, and you can noodle on something endlessly when you start getting to this stage, and you have to sort of pick your battles. You know, the hand wasn't really that important when compared to the rest of the design elements, and thus I just decided I needed to stick to those things and really get this thing finished up. Still trying to get rid of some of that line work. I could have gone a little brighter on the metallic elements, like on those cylinders. I could have made the highlights a little brighter, and I could have made the shadows a little darker, and that would have made them look a little more metallic, a little more shiny. But it will start to kind of look like chrome at that point, and I wanted the weapons to look a little. I didn't want them to look really shiny and pristine. I wanted them to look a little used, and like something that could be used in the field. The ammo there, I spent a little bit of time on trying to refine the shape of, but it's not necessary to go to each one and render each one individually out, because they're so small and there's so many of them that the eye will be able to pick up what's going on there with just some indications of form and light. Creating some cast shadows on that hand. Here I'm putting a little panel on the little opening for that weapon. I left the big open space in there intentionally because I knew I was going to do this. I wasn't quite sure how I wanted to design it, so I'm kind of winging it here. But I think it turns out okay. Second thought, I probably should have made the buttons a little bigger so they're a little easier to see, but I think it works overall. Just drop a little quick shadow down there. And that's pretty much it. I straightened that foot out. It was turned a little bit too far in. I play with the levels, and here I'm going to wrap this little texture down. I wanted to put some camo in there to make the just to make the design a little more interesting. And I found some free textures just off of a Google image search and downloaded it, put it in on a different layer, and use a transform tool to kind of wrap it around the figure. When you're laying down a texture like that on something, you just leave it flat, it can tend to make your picture look flat as well. So it's good to use a transform tool to just kind of move it around and try to make it shape around your form a little bit. And that's pretty much it. And here's the final image. Didn't do a whole lot different. I played with the levels a little bit more and removed a couple of the highlights. There were a few that were a little bit too strong on certain portions of the character, but that's pretty much it. I created a copy of the character and blew him up in the background, kind of faded him out just to give it a little flair so it wasn't just a plain white background. Again, I'd like to apologize for taking so long on this, but it was a lot of fun. I'm currently trying to figure out a way to capture sketching. I'd like to do that next, make a few videos, sketching faces or anatomy or something like that. But in the meantime, this was a lot of fun. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this, and see you again next time.